The wind howled like a hungry wolf across the desolate plains of Montana. Snow, thick and relentless, blanketed everything in a shroud of white, blurring the edges of Jedediah's lonely ranch. He sat by the crackling fire, the only sound besides the storm, the rhythmic creak of his rocking chair. Years of solitude had etched deep lines into his weathered face, each one a testament to hardship and loss. Suddenly, a faint whimper cut through the wind's fury. Jedediah frowned, dismissing it as the storm playing tricks, but then he heard it again, closer this time. A small, desperate sound. Curiosity overcoming his weary reluctance, he wrapped himself in a thick wool coat and ventured out into the blizzard. Near the gate, almost buried in the snow, he saw her, a small figure huddled on the ground, barefoot, her thin dress offering little protection against the biting cold. Her face, pale and fragile, was framed by dark, tangled hair. Jedediah's gruff exterior softened. He gently scooped her up, her small body surprisingly light in his arms. Her eyes fluttered open, wide and filled with a fear that tugged at something long dormant within him. He carried her inside, the warmth of the fire a stark contrast to the frozen world they had just left. He laid her on his worn sofa, his gaze lingering on her bare feet, blue with cold. He fetched a blanket and wrapped it around her shivering form. "There," he murmured, his voice rough from disuse. He stoked the fire, its warmth gradually filling the small cabin. The girl remained silent, her eyes fixed on him, a mixture of apprehension and exhaustion in their depths. Jedediah busied himself preparing a cup of warm milk, his movements slow and deliberate. He offered it to her, and after a moment's hesitation, she accepted, her small hands trembling as she held the mug. As she drank, a faint color returned to her cheeks. Jedediah watched her, a flicker of something akin to protectiveness stirring within his heart. He knew nothing about her, where she came from, or why she was alone in such a brutal storm. But in that moment, none of that mattered. All that mattered was the small, silent child he had found at his gate. If you're enjoying this story and want to see what happens next to Jedediah and the mysterious girl, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more chapters. The next morning, the storm had subsided, leaving behind a pristine landscape of glistening snow. The girl, whom Jedediah had decided to call Sarah for the time being, was still asleep on the sofa. He watched her as he prepared breakfast, his gaze thoughtful. She looked even younger in the soft morning light, her features delicate and innocent. When she finally awoke, she looked around the unfamiliar room with wide, uncertain eyes. Jedediah offered her a plate of eggs and bacon, which she ate slowly, her gaze never quite meeting his. Over the next few days, Sarah remained quiet and withdrawn. She would help with small chores around the cabin, her movements silent and efficient, but she rarely spoke. Jedediah didn't press her, sensing that she had been through something traumatic. He provided her with warm clothes and a pair of his old, oversized boots, which she wore with a grateful smile, the first he had seen. He told her stories of the ranch, of the horses he used to raise, of the changing seasons in Montana. Slowly, tentatively, Sarah began to respond, her voice a soft whisper at first, gradually growing a little stronger with each passing day. One afternoon, as they sat by the fire, Sarah drew a picture on a scrap of paper with a piece of charcoal Jedediah had given her. It was a drawing of a large, imposing house with dark windows and a tall, foreboding fence. A shiver ran down Jedediah's spine as he looked at it. There was something unsettling about the drawing, a sense of unease that he couldn't quite place. He asked Sarah about it, but she simply shook her head, her eyes clouding over with a hint of fear. He didn't push her, but the image of the dark house lingered in his mind, a silent question hanging in the air between them. He knew deep down that Sarah's arrival was not a random act of fate, and that her past would eventually catch up to them. Weeks turned into months. The The harsh winter gradually gave way to the first signs of spring, and the landscape around the ranch began to thaw. Sarah had blossomed under Jedediah's care. The fear in her eyes had lessened, replaced by a quiet confidence. She laughed more now, her small voice a welcome melody in the once silent cabin. Jedediah found himself looking forward to her stories, her questions about the ranch, her eagerness to help with the chores. He hadn't felt this sense of purpose in years, not since. He pushed the painful memory away. One day, while Jedediah was tending to the small vegetable garden he had started, Sarah came running towards him, her face pale with fright. "Men on horses!" she gasped, pointing towards the distant horizon. Jedediah straightened up, his hand instinctively reaching for the old rifle he kept in the cabin. He squinted, and in the shimmering heat haze, he could indeed see several figures on horseback approaching the ranch. They were still too far away to identify, but there was something about their posture, their determined pace, that sent a cold dread through him. He quickly ushered Sarah inside. "Stay here, and don't open the door for anyone," he instructed, his voice firm. He grabbed his rifle and positioned himself by the window, his eyes scanning the approaching riders. He counted 4 of them, their faces grim and shadowed by the brims of their hats. They rode with a sense of purpose that spoke of trouble. Jedediah's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know who these men were, but he had a sinking feeling that they had something to do with Sarah's mysterious past. He tightened his grip on the rifle, ready to defend the girl who had unexpectedly found her way into his life and his heart. The riders reined in their horses just outside the gate, kicking up dust in the late afternoon sun. One of them, a tall man with a cruel scar across his cheek, dismounted and strode towards the cabin. The others remained mounted, their eyes fixed on the small building. The scarred man knocked loudly on the door. Jedediah, his rifle held steady, called out, "Who is it?" "We're looking for a girl." The man's voice was gruff and demanding. "Small, dark hair, answers to the name of, well, we ain't sure what she calls herself now." Jedediah's blood ran cold. He glanced at Sarah, who was huddled behind him, her eyes wide with terror. He knew he had to protect her, no matter the cost. "There's no girl here," Jedediah replied, his voice firm and unwavering. "You've come to the wrong place." The scarred man chuckled, a harsh, unpleasant sound. "Don't lie to me, old man. We know she's here. We tracked her all the way from Willow Creek." He gestured to his companions. "We ain't leaving without her, so you can either hand her over peacefully or we can do this the hard way." Jedediah's grip tightened on his rifle. He had lived a solitary life for so long, but in that moment he knew he couldn't let these men take Sarah. She had become more than just a stray child he had found in the snow. She had become family. "You'll have to go through me," Jedediah said, his voice low and dangerous. "If you're on the edge of your seat and want to see how Jedediah confronts these dangerous men, make sure to subscribe for the next chapters of this thrilling story." The scarred man's eyes narrowed, his gaze hard and assessing. "You're an old man," he sneered. "Don't be foolish." "Maybe," Jedediah replied, his voice calm despite the adrenaline surging through him. "But I won't stand by and let you harm an innocent child." He raised his rifle slightly, a clear warning. The scarred man hesitated for a moment, then a cruel smile spread across his face. "All right, old-timer, have it your way." He signaled to his men, and they dismounted, their hands moving towards the guns at their hips. Jedediah knew he was outnumbered, but he had the element of surprise and the protection of his cabin. He quickly moved to the side window, his eyes scanning the positions of the 4 men. He fired a warning shot into the air, the sharp crack echoing across the quiet ranch. The men froze, momentarily taken aback. "Leave now!" Jedediah called out, his voice ringing with authority. "Before someone gets hurt." But his warning was ignored. The scarred man barked an order, and the men spread out, attempting to surround the cabin. Jedediah knew he had to act fast. He aimed carefully and fired again, this time hitting the ground close to one of the horses, causing it to rear up in fright. The rider struggled to control the animal, momentarily disrupting their advance. This was Jedediah's chance. He bolted out the back door, Sarah following close behind. Jedediah led Sarah towards the dense woods behind his ranch, the trees offering much-needed cover. He knew these woods like the back of his hand, every twist and turn, every hidden path. They moved quickly and silently through the underbrush, the sound of the pursuing riders growing fainter in the distance. "Can you run faster, Sarah?" Jedediah whispered, his breath coming in short gasps. Sarah nodded, her small hand tightly gripping his. They pressed on, the trees becoming their allies, shielding them from their pursuers. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a small, hidden cave that Jedediah used for shelter during hunting trips. It was small and cramped, but it offered a temporary sanctuary. They huddled inside, catching their breath. Sarah's face was pale, but her eyes held a newfound determination. "They won't find us here, will they?" she whispered. Jedediah put his arm around her. "Not if we're careful," he reassured her. "But we can't stay here forever. We need to figure out who those men are and what they want with you." Sarah hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. They used to work for my father," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He had something they wanted, something valuable." Tears welled up in her eyes. "They killed him to get it." Jedediah's heart ached for the little girl who had witnessed such a terrible tragedy. He held her close, offering what comfort he could. "And what is it they're looking for now, Sarah?" he asked gently. Sarah reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden bird. "This," she said, her voice trembling. "My father hid it, told me to never let anyone else have it." Jedediah examined the wooden bird. It was beautifully crafted, the small details surprisingly intricate. He couldn't imagine why anyone would kill for something like this. "Do you know what's inside, Sarah?" he asked. Sarah shook her head. "My father never told me. He just said it was important and that I needed to keep it safe." Jedediah realized that this small wooden bird held the key to Sarah's past and the danger that was now pursuing them. They couldn't stay hidden in the cave forever. They needed to find a way to protect Sarah and whatever secret the bird held. He decided that their best chance was to reach the nearest town, find the sheriff, and explain their situation. It was a risk, but staying on the run in the wilderness with limited supplies was even more dangerous. Under the cover of darkness, they carefully made their way out of the woods, Jedediah constantly scanning their surroundings. They walked for hours, the journey long and arduous. Just as dawn was breaking, they finally reached the outskirts of the small town of Redemption. As they approached the town, they noticed a familiar group of horses hitched outside the saloon. Jedediah's heart sank. The scarred man and his gang had already arrived. They would have to be extra careful. The stakes have just gotten higher. To see if Jedediah and Sarah can evade their pursuers in town and uncover the secret of the wooden bird, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for the thrilling conclusion of this chapter and the ones to come. Jedediah pulled Sarah into a narrow alleyway, hidden from the main street. "They're here," he whispered, his voice grim. "We need to be smart about this." He peered cautiously around the corner. He could see the scarred man and his companions entering and exiting the saloon, their eyes sharp and watchful. They were clearly looking for Sarah. Jedediah knew they couldn't directly approach the sheriff. The gang would likely be watching the lawman's office. He needed a different plan. He spotted a small general store across the street. It was their best bet for gathering information and perhaps finding a way to contact the sheriff discreetly. He waited until the street was relatively clear before making a dash across with Sarah. Inside the store, a kindly old woman with a warm smile stood behind the counter. Jedediah pretended to browse the shelves, keeping a close eye on the street outside. "Can I help you find something, sir?" the woman asked. Jedediah lowered his voice. "We're in some trouble," he said. "There are some men in town looking for us. Dangerous men." He quickly explained their situation, omitting the details about the wooden bird. The woman's eyes widened with concern. "Land sakes," she whispered. "Those sound like the Barlow gang. They've been causing trouble around these parts for weeks." She nodded towards the back of the store. "There's a back exit you can use. It leads to a quiet side street. Maybe you can find the sheriff from there." Following the storekeeper's swift directions, Jedediah and Sarah slipped out the dusty back exit, finding themselves on a less-traveled side street, mercifully devoid of the main thoroughfare's commotion. They moved quickly, their footsteps light and cautious, hugging the grimy brick walls of the buildings. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every distant sound a potential pursuit. Jedediah's weathered eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, his hand hovering near the worn grip of his revolver, a silent promise of protection to the small hand he clutched in his own. Suddenly, the unmistakable crunch of approaching footsteps on the coarse ground reached their ears, growing louder with alarming speed. Jedediah, with a practiced instinct born of years in the wild, pulled Sarah roughly but gently behind a large, splintered wooden barrel, its stale scent of molasses and dust momentarily overwhelming. Their hearts hammered in unison, a frantic drumbeat against their ribs. The scarred man, Barlow, his face a mask of cold determination, rounded the corner with one of his grim-faced accomplices, their eyes like predatory hawks, relentlessly scanning the street. "They must be around here somewhere," Barlow growled, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very ground. "Keep looking. They can't have gone far." They walked past the barrel, so close that Jedediah could almost feel the heat radiating from their menacing presence. He held his breath, every muscle tense, praying with a desperate intensity he hadn't felt in years that they wouldn't be discovered. Sarah, pressed tightly against his leg, was a tiny, trembling anchor of fear. The seconds stretched into an eternity until finally the heavy footsteps faded and the two dangerous figures vanished around the next bend. Once the coast was clear, he and Sarah quickly moved in the opposite direction, their movements swifter now, fueled by the fresh surge of adrenaline. They finally reached the sheriff's office, a small, unassuming building painted a faded blue, nestled quietly at the very edge of town, almost overlooked. Jedediah cautiously opened the creaking wooden door, ushering Sarah inside before following her, his gaze sweeping the empty street one last time. Inside, a middle-aged man with a stern but fair face, lines of weariness etched around his eyes, sat behind a cluttered wooden desk. He looked up in surprise from a stack of papers as they entered, his hand instinctively going to the star pinned on his vest. Jedediah, wasting no time, quickly explained their perilous story, his voice urgent but steady. This time, he included the harrowing details about Sarah's father and the mysterious wooden bird, carefully producing it from his pocket and showing it to the sheriff. The lawman listened intently, his expression growing increasingly serious with each word, his initial surprise giving way to a grim understanding. "The Barlow gang, you say?" the sheriff muttered, his gaze fixed on the intricate carving of the bird in Jedediah's hand. "They're wanted for robbery and murder in several territories, a real nasty piece of work." He paused, looking at Sarah. "This wooden bird, you think it's something they stole from your father?" Sarah, still a little shaky but emboldened by Jedediah's presence, nodded, her large eyes filled with the residual fear of her past. "He said it was very important," she whispered, her small voice barely audible. The sheriff examined the bird closely, turning it over in his hands, his brow furrowed in thought. "Well, it's certainly unique," he mused, his gaze thoughtful. He looked up at Jedediah, a resolute glint in his eyes. "Don't you worry. We'll keep you both safe here. This town doesn't take kindly to men like Barlow. I'll gather a posse and we'll deal with Barlow and his men properly." His words, spoken with quiet authority, were a lifeline to Jedediah and Sarah. The sheriff, a man of his word and a pillar of the community, wasted no time. Within the hour, he had gathered a determined group of armed townsfolk, ranchers, storekeepers, and laborers, all united against the threat Barlow represented. Their resolve was palpable as they confronted Barlow's gang at the saloon, where the outlaws had been brazenly drinking. A tense standoff ensued, the air thick with unspoken threats and the metallic scent of anticipation. The silence was shattered by a sudden, brief but fierce gunfight echoing through the quiet streets of Redemption. In the end, outmatched and outmaneuvered by the sheriff's quick thinking and the townsfolk's courage, Barlow and his remaining men were apprehended, subdued, and finally brought to justice for their heinous crimes. The mysterious wooden bird, the very object that had driven so much fear and conflict, was later discovered to contain a meticulously folded, brittle map. It was a map leading to a hidden gold mine that Sarah's father had secretly discovered, a fortune he had intended to build a new life with. This hidden treasure, and not merely vengeance, was the true reason Barlow and his gang had been relentlessly after him, and then so cruelly after Sarah. The revelation finally brought a sense of closure to the terrifying ordeal. With the immediate danger finally over and the town safe once more, Jedediah and Sarah chose to remain in Redemption. Jedediah, no longer a solitary figure consumed by his past, found a profound, renewed sense of purpose and warmth in caring for Sarah. His gruff exterior slowly melted away, revealing a gentle, devoted guardian. The townspeople, grateful to Jedediah for his bravery and deeply sympathetic to Sarah's traumatic plight, welcomed them into their tight-knit community with open arms. They saw in Jedediah a quiet hero, and in Sarah a resilient child who deserved a fresh start. Sarah, once a frightened and silent child, gradually healed from her deep-seated trauma. The nightmares lessened, replaced by days filled with laughter and the simple joys of childhood. She found a truly loving home with Jedediah, and their unique bond, forged in the brutal embrace of a harsh winter and tested by the crucible of danger, grew stronger and more profound with each passing day. Jedediah had come to the rescue of a barefoot girl in the snow, unaware of her secret, and in doing so, he had not only saved her life, but had also unexpectedly found a vibrant new one for himself. The lonely rancher's gate, once a symbol of his isolation, had opened to more than just a child. It had opened to hope, to healing, and to a future filled with the warmth of a true family. Thank you for following Jedediah and Sarah's incredible journey. If you enjoyed this tale of courage, human connection, and the rugged beauty of the Old West, please remember to subscribe to the channel for more captivating stories and adventures.